Okay, lesson 102. This lesson's kind of got a little bit of fluff in it, to be honest with you, but we talk in this lesson a lot about tools to get into some hardware. I'm going to pick out some stuff that I think the book maybe leaves out or doesn't touch on very well. So, by all means, be sure to read through the chapter here, but hopefully I can give you a little bit of insight, some sort of insider info, for lack of a better term. But the first thing I want to mention is what we refer to as trade size versus actual size. Okay. So a lot of times in a lot of industries, especially the electrical industry, you'll talk about things in what they call trade size. That's kind of the common lingo, but they may not actually be that size, right? So here's an example that we're all probably familiar with, or if not, you should get familiar. So a piece of 2x4 lumber. Okay. Obviously it measures 2 inches by 4 inches, you would think. Of course, that's not the case. Okay. If you actually go measure a piece of 2x4 lumber, it's going to be roughly 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches. Why did it become common to call this 2x4? Of course, I don't know the full history there, but naturally 2x4 comes off the tongue a little faster than 1.5 by 3.5. But my point here is we do a lot of this in the electrical trade as well. Okay. And the biggest spot we do this is with our raceway sizes. All right. So we again have trade size, and we're going to talk about internal diameter here for most of these. And then we're going to have what's actually actual size. And I'm going to actually talk about the actual size as the outside diameter, right? And I'll tell you why as we go forth here. But we talk about a 1/2 inch piece of conduit. So we're talking about conduit, tubing, pipe, whatever you want to call it, a conduit. A 1/2 inch piece of conduit, if you measure, inside diameter is roughly 1/2 inch, depending on the type. But the actual outside diameter for most, again, every type of raceway is going to be just a little different, but it's actually going to measure right about 7/8 of an inch outside diameter. Okay. Same thing if we go down the list, 3/4 inch conduit. Outside diameter is actually about 1 1/8 of an inch. Okay. 1 inch comes out to about 1 3/8. And right now you're thinking this all seems pretty random. How am I supposed to remember all that? Well, here we get a little more uniform. So 1 1/4 trade size measures 1 3/4. So it's a 1/2 inch bigger. Now we get 1.5. Well, that's 2 inch. So now we see a pattern develop, and this carries through here on out. But 2 inch actual size is 2.5. 2.5 is 3. 3 is 3.5. And you can see the pattern here. All the way up to a 4 inch trade size is actually 4.5 outside diameter. So essentially from 1 1/4 up, you simply need to add a 1/2 inch. So the only ones you really need to remember are your 1/2 inch, 3/4, and 1 inch. So we have 7/8, 1 1/8, and 1 3/8. So those are the only three oddballs. They're also the most common, so I'm going to highly encourage you to remember that. You might be thinking, why do I care about that? Okay, if I got a piece of 1 inch conduit, I don't really care how big it is because it is what it is. Well, not the case. Your foreman tells you to go to the truck and get a hole saw because you're running 1 inch and you got to terminate your connector, a 1 inch connector, into a box, and you need to drill a hole. So, the novice would be inclined to grab a 1 inch hole saw, when in reality they need to grab this 1 3/8 inch hole saw. So, again here, this is what they call an electrician's hole saw kit. Reason being, we have, what do you see here? 7/8, 1 1/8, 1 3/8, so on and so forth. So, again, that's just one pretty minor reason why that's pretty important info. And frankly, it's not anything anybody sat me down and taught me when I was getting started. So, I wished I'd known it, so hopefully you guys can take that and do something with it. So, trade size versus actual size. We could talk about that all day. Be careful. Keep it in mind. Next thing I want to talk about, and this is somewhat similar, but not quite the same as our trade size, but bolt sizes, right? So we've got a bolt, and every bolt has a nut that would go with it, and then the head of the bolt as well, right? So if I talk about bolt size, I'm kind of talking about the shaft here with the threads. When I talk about then maybe the nut size, naturally this is a nut, but then to turn this bolt, it's essentially another nut, right? So if I talk about a bolt size, And when I say nut size, I really mean what size wrench or what size tool do we need to turn this nut or the head of this bolt? For a 1/4 inch bolt, it's going to actually be 7/16. For a 3/8 inch bolt, it's actually going to be 9/16. Those are the two very most common sort of bolt sizes, threaded rod sizes you're going to see. Certainly not the only ones you're going to see, but those are the two most common. Keep that in mind. If you're running 3/8 hardware, your foreman says grab a wrench to tighten this stuff, you're looking for a 9/16 wrench. That's the kind of stuff that's going to separate, the green rookie apprentice from that one that everybody wants on their job, right? Just those minute differences, okay? Because again, he's going to send you out to his truck and say grab a wrench, and that's what you're going to see. So if you know which one you're looking for, that's going to make that task just a little bit easier, right? So some more on bolt and screw info. You're going to hear a lot of terms thrown around the job site as far as how they describe these different pieces of hardware, screws, bolts, whatever. So our first is our shaft diameter. You might hear people talk about it in basically gauge sizes. So you got a 6, an 8, a 10. Those are very common sort of shaft diameters. That's a gauge, right? And then as you get bigger, you're going to hear, as I said, 1/4 inch, 3/8. So essentially, we're kind of going from small to big here. So a 6 gauge, an 8 gauge, a 10 gauge, and then we actually get into inches. And I'll give you some examples here in a moment. But and then we have threads per inch is kind of the next way to describe a screw or a bolt. So you could have 20 threads per inch. You could have 24. 24 is probably the most common in our industry. Or I'm sorry, I should say a 32 actually. But 32 is about the most common in our industry. And then you have length. This is simply just a measurement, right, in inches. Could be 3/8, 1/2 inch, 1 inch. I mean, we could go on forever here talking about this. So you might have somebody say, I need a 6/32 by 1 inch. So 6 refers to a 6 gauge, 32 refers to 32 threads per inch. Again, that's the most common. And then the length, so 1 inch in this case. So you might hear another very common is a 1/4 20 by 3/8. Okay, and now let's get into some specific examples here. So again, as I just said, you have a 1/4 20 by 3/8. What do we use that for? We can fasten a beam clamp to a conduit support or a beam clamp mini here. If you guys have ran any conduit, you're probably already familiar with this. If you haven't, you will get familiar with that. So your 1/4, and sometimes they just leave off the 3/8, so just say 1/4 20. If you're running conduit on beam clamps and they say a 1/4 20, you're looking for a 1/4 20 by 3/8. Again, it's the kind of things that maybe nobody ever sits you down and tells you. You got to learn the hard way. But another common one is a 6/32 by 1 inch in this case. We use that for fastening a device to a wall box. So these little screws are actually 6/32. Again, that's a nice one to know because it's very often that these break, they get lost, they snap off. You got to grab another one. There's probably a jug of 6/32 screws somewhere on that foreman's van. If you know you're looking for the 6/32, you're going to be golden. Better yet, learn to recognize a 6/32 on site versus an 8/32 or a 10/24. It might sound a little ridiculous right now, but trust me, if you do enough switch and plug installs, you will get very familiar with what a 6/32 looks like and feels like. And then another one here, a 10/32 by 3/8. Well, that's a ground screw. Okay. And again, you see the common thing here is a 32. So when you're using kind of your smaller sort of electrical specific screws, 32 is a very common threading for sure. So I mean, there's an infinite number of combinations. You got to learn what you use, what your company uses, what the job site's using, whatever the case is. But we could talk about this all day long. It's meant to be a real brief intro, but again, it's those small differences that are going to set you apart from the other folks working on your job site, right?